Roland Penrose said that African art in its style has 4 distinct qualities. These are blocked out features, ferocious expressions, geometric shapes, and vitality. Some features of African art are it contains a balance of realism and bizarre expression, it has realistic form but excessive exaggeration, and it has been said to have sophisticated, ingenious, and overly refined style. A painting done by Picasso called Demoiselle d'Avignon had the most African influence on the West in his artwork. One thing Picasso believed is the power of art to reinstate the power of sorcery, to disrupt our lives and change our behavior, all things African art were believed to do. Several European artists from the late 18th century began to collect African art. They were emerging from the avant-garde style, and this urged viewers to think of the meaning behind the art and also create their own opinions. A new appreciation began for African art and its style. People recognized the richness in materials, themes and purposes, spectrum of material, and transitions and syntheses, as well as art began to be appreciated for the aesthetic value. Traditional African culture has impacted modern-day Western culture through art forms such as painting, sculptures, and music.
Today I will share with you a little bit about the visual art of Africa, which roots link back to the petroglyphs or engravings and pictographs or cave paintings. Specific examples of these can be found in the Bushmen or Aboriginal peoples of Africa's rock art. This rock art's chief characteristic was its naturalistic feel. The vast majority of figures in this type of art are men and animals. However, there are other objects found in some of these paintings which are assumed to have symbolic meaning. The meanings of these objects are often hard to discover, however. Being such an important part in the social life of Africa, African paintings are found in every area of life, in play, in work, and in religion. These paintings, therefore, their symbolism and their style rely greatly upon which area of life they're involved in. Although at first African art was seen as unintelligent or even savage, eventually African art began to affect the Western world in a better fashion. Great painters such as Matisse and Picasso were deeply impacted by African art. Some of Picasso's work even began to seem as genuinely African as some modern African art. Pablo Picasso and Matisse were both very influential in the spread of African art in the Western world. They studied in Paris, where many other artists were influenced by African art as well. Another famous artist, the Western painter Max Weber, was also deeply impacted by African art. After he came to Paris and saw how many artists, including Picasso and Matisse, were so deeply affected by African art.
Now we'll look at the influence African art and culture has had on Western sculptures. The African Art Museum in New Jersey, that is funded by the Society of African Missions, claims that there are 10 aesthetic principles found in traditional African art. These are inventiveness, stylized realism, intricate details, dynamic form, symbolic imagery, geometric motifs, harmonious elements, subtle proportions, assemblages of natural elements with dramatic resonance, and effective surfaces. You can see the inventiveness when looking at the Yoruba iron figures, the stylized realism displayed by the Bamana female figures from Mali. Subtle proportions are displayed all throughout African art. An example of this is the Kissy Stone figure riding a horse. Now that we've explored the characteristics of African art, let's look at the influence it's made on Western sculptures. Remember the inventiveness of the Yoruba? Martin Pierre uses the same inventiveness and incorporates the African culture into his sculptures. Pierre, a born American, went to the Peace Corps for 2 years, and while in Sierra Leone, he developed an admiration for their craftsmanship and learned their techniques. An example is his sculpture CFAO, which is the same name as the 19th century French trade company, which suggests themes of trade, colonialization, and cultural exchange. The mask in the middle is his interpretation of the ceremonial masks used in Gabon, West Africa. What a wonderful display of symbolic themes. Another very important Western sculptor comes from Romania, Constantine Brâncuși. Let's take a look at his work, The Kiss, done in 1916. It is a modern example of subtle proportions well known in African art. Taking a look on these works, you can see the wonderful influence that African art has made on Western sculptures.
African music can be seen as one of the original influences in modern-day music. Our journey starts a couple of centuries back with the Atlantic slave trade, which saw many African slaves taken into Europe, Brazil, and America. While in itself may have been a dark era in terms of human rights, it was indeed a golden era of refreshing influences in terms of African music and art. African music is often described by modern ears as chaotic, especially when broken down. The vast number of various instruments creating so much sound together can be overwhelming to Western listeners. The process of taking several instruments and developing them into a rhythm is called layering. Layering is the foundational principle of African music. One modern-day artist who was influenced by African music is Peter Gabriel. He was a lead singer for the progressive rock band Genesis. However, in 1975, he left the group and embarked on his solo career. He reached superstar status with the release of the album So. He used layering, drum rhythms, and many other African concepts. He is the most successful artist to ever incorporate African music into his own. Even in the recent past, we see artists such as Shakira and Kena incorporate African style into their music. Many movies such as The Lion King and Madagascar use music with African influence in them.
I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. You like to move
Believe it or not, African art can play a huge role in a Christian's life. However, there are many negative aspects to African art that Christians should be aware of. One thing is totem poles. Many Christians around the globe have totem poles in their homes as decorations, but have no idea what they actually mean. The little animals on the pole all actually have different spiritual meanings. For example, a frog is known for bringing wealth, and an owl is respectful and symbolizes souls of the departed. Totem poles were something that native Africans worshipped and truly believed in. African masks, however, have more spiritual meaning than the totem poles do. When they create them, they believe that when worn, spirits will be able to communicate to them through the mask. This is why they are worn at many events such as weddings and funerals. Even though these Africans have a lot of negative ways of living, there are a lot of positives about their spirituality. Many African villages would have a priest that would orally pass down stories he knew about God and would help the villagers see how terrible that their spirit worshipping was. Today in Africa, many American missionaries have been able to go to these spiritual villages and show the people there how wrong their acts are. They do not need masks to communicate to the one true God, and they don't need totem poles to provide for their needs. So many from our country have been able to preach the gospel and shed a light into these natives' lives.